All right, hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 351 of the Health Detective Podcast. And if you missed episode 350, you guys got to go back to that one and check it out after this podcast. And that is because we are basically doing the closest thing to an FDN conference since before the pandemic, when FDN actually did host live conferences each year. So this particular conference is going to be coming up in October of 2024 in beautiful Mission Bay, San Diego. If you guys have never been to San Diego, please look this up on Google Images. Mission Bay is just absolutely stunning. And so that's where this conference is going to be hosted. And the hosts are none other than Jeremy Maleka of Biocanic, who he created Biocanic, and his wife, Jen Maleka, who is a very famous FDN and someone that actually got me started on my FDN journey. The entire reason I know what FDN is because of seeing Jen talk in a coffee shop 7 years ago. I only share this publicly sometimes, but Jen is actually the FDN that I trusted for my mom to go to with her own health. And my mom, who had spent, and she didn't have this money to be clear, but she always gives me permission to share this. She spent over $100,000 with my dad on her health, trying to figure out her thyroid stuff. And again, they didn't have that money, so this is called debt, which sucks. And the $5,000 she had spent with Jen at the time, she still considers the best money she ever spent on her health, which is just the coolest thing ever, considering that woman went through the ringer with Western medicine. So if you'd like to join us at Hicks, it's called Hicks. We have a QR code up there, and then I also have a caption for you, so it's a little easier. So you go to hicks-live.com, and we do have a code for podcast listeners. It is the best code that you can get, or tied for the best discount that you can get. It is all caps HDP200 at checkout. That is $200 off either the general admission or the VIP ticket. It is good till the last day in August. Jen and Jeremy are awesome, but they are very type A and strict people, so this is not the time to go back to them in September and ask for a discount. They're not going to buy that, I promise you. They are very successful business people for a reason, so use the discount now. If you can get the VIP ticket still, if it's still available, absolutely do that one. There's going to be 100 of us apparently on a freaking boat going on a sunset cruise in Mission Bay for one of the days at the conference. Dinner will be served, paleo, gluten-free, dairy-free, all the stuff that you want. And it's just going to be absolutely amazing. And you get a CGM in that one as well. So hopefully you guys will get to see us there. I'll be there. Reed Davis, Elizabeth Gaines, course mentor, course supervisor, Lucy McKellar, the AFDNP director. So the whole crew's going. Hicks-live.com and HDP200 at checkout. Now, time to get to our topic today with our guest. I will read her bio and we'll jump right into it. She actually just had Reed Davis on her podcast recently. And so that's how they got fully connected, because she's getting more interested in the functional side. So Sherry Price is a pharmacist, certified life and weight loss coach, and host of the Health, Habits, and Epic Living podcast. Sherry's work is dedicated to helping women take charge of their health and wellness through lifestyle, mindset, and habit change. Through her multiple empowerment-based coaching programs and podcast, Dr. Price has helped thousands of women up-level their mindset, ditch bad habits, and revitalize their energy through food, fitness, and healthy relationships so they can live as their most epic version of themselves. Dr. Price, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks, Detective Evan, for that.
One day, maybe I'll go back and get those credentials, make myself a little more credible here. For now, I'm just a pseudo detective. So how we normally start this show is obviously a lot of the time we have people who are very sick on, and I talk to them about their health journeys. Now, one of the things that you did disclose to us in information that I didn't just share in the bio is you definitely had some things to work on, but it's not like, it doesn't seem like it was cancer or Hashimoto's diagnosis. It was, around these bad habits. And that's obviously the topic of today. So if I may, how I'll word the question is, what were some of the bad habits that you dealt with, and when did they begin?
So several bad habits, but one of them that became apparent was I would drink a little too much alcohol at the end of the day. And how I knew that, or how I felt that, is just the next day, I wasn't feeling optimal. I wasn't feeling top of my game. I would need more caffeine to get started. I feel more groggy. My sleep wasn't as good. And then there were certain other aspects that just didn't feel in alignment with my values. So I do value health as a healthcare practitioner. And, you know, when you're not remembering conversations the night before, or maybe you had a little too much to drink and that filter wasn't there, and you said something in a way that, oh, that could have said it a little bit better. So I was reflecting on that the next day. And I use the term now reflecting, but back then it was like berating myself, right? Just not feeling good that I would overindulge. And so when I tried to cut back, it was difficult to do so, and we could get into that. So it just felt like this habit I kept falling into. And I would say I didn't feel in my 20s, I just felt I normally drank. What does that mean? It's a different definition for everybody, but I didn't feel threatened by it or alarmed by any of my behavior. I felt I was just an, 20-year-old doing whatever they do around alcohol. It was really in my late 30s that I started to recognize that this is becoming like a nightly habit. Like I'm coming home from work, it's a way to de-stress. And then as you know, I didn't drink during pregnancy, but after pregnancy, it was a way that, moms would get together. We joked that it was like mommy's sippy cup, mommy's mommy juice. Then the t-shirts started coming out, like all of society started to adopt the mommy wine culture, rosé all day. And I just started noticing like how much centric alcohol had been in my relationships and in my social network. And then it probably wasn't till around my mid 40s that I got really serious about wanting to cut back. So I just dealt with it for a period of time and thought it would go away on its own, or this was just a season of life. Yeah. And so I really, really wanted to take charge of it more so after about 6 to 8 years of, I call it an over drinking habit.
Were you someone who started, like, did you have your first sip of alcohol in your teens, or was it the college life? Like, what happened that actually even started alcohol consumption? I'm always curious about how these things start.
Yeah. Gosh, and now we have so much research and data on, don't do it in your teens if you can. Because it sets you up, especially before 15. If you have your first sip before 15, it really increases the likelihood of somebody going on to have an addiction. I did drink in high school to be part of the cool club when the cool club was doing it. I never sought it outside of that social network fabric. It was just something that felt kind of rebellious and something you would do, but it wasn't like I did it a lot, right? It was just when those times came up after a basketball game and we went out celebrating at McDonald's and then headed over to the secret part of the woods. And so, yeah, then I would drink, but I didn't feel it had a hold on me until it was around my 30s.
Okay. I think what you're talking about, though, is so relatable. And I know you and I don't know each other well, but I've always been very transparent on this show about issues I've had with other substances. So ironically, alcohol was never the one, but other things. And I think what happens with alcohol that's particularly dangerous is that even when you're doing it in high school, there's still this idea that at one point in my life, I will be able to do this. My parents go and buy it in a store, or I watch this adult go buy it. I'm walk down my town and everyone has a drink at dinner. If the seating's outdoors. So you're seeing it as this normalized thing. Now we're seeing the same thing in many states, even with something like marijuana. When I was in high school, that wasn't a thing, right? So other than alcohol, you were not supposed to be doing any of this stuff. And you identified that was bad. Now, even though you kept doing it. But at the same time, I think as someone, I'm not proud of this, but as someone who has experimented with quite a few things, I'm always shocked that alcohol was the one that we made legal. I mean, that is a powerful drug, especially when drank in excess. And then it's very damaging to the body as well. So the fact that this one got normalized is very scary, because I sit virtually across from you and I'm reading your bio beforehand and I know your credentials. I'm like, this is a highly intelligent person, and even highly intelligent people are still subject to being stuck with this. So I'd like to dive into one part in particular, if you don't mind going here, because I think this really is something that those of us who have dealt with these things struggle with. You talked about very transparently this awareness in your 30s that, hey, maybe this isn't, something I want to be doing in the way that I'm doing, but it wasn't until 40s that I'm actually taking it seriously. What were you experiencing psychologically? Because I know for me, when I've had those awarenesses, it's like a daily battle, man, and it really sucks.
Yeah, yeah, it's like the devil and the angel on your shoulder saying, "Oh, you can drink today. It's no problem. We'll give it up tomorrow." And then, it's just the devil wins, I would say, I would have such awareness to it that it felt like I wanted to rebel, in a way. And cleaning up my act was something I would just put off till tomorrow. And then tomorrow never comes, right? It's those months that go by, those years that go by. And then it's all of a sudden, it's like, when am I going to stop lying to myself? And so, yeah, I did have years of just letting it go and take its course. And the habit just kept growing. So it was, one glass, and then it was 2 glasses of Chardonnay at night. And then, some nights I drink a whole bottle, and I was like, I just put down a whole bottle. Really? Me? Like, that just seems like a lot of alcohol. So it wasn't the same amount. I think people think it's like this steady upward trajectory, like this line has to look like this. It was a little bit more of a roller coaster. Some months were better. Some months I took off, like a dry January or sober October. So there was the roller coaster, but the roller coaster what had some predictability to it, right? It would be the start time and how I would feel about myself the next day. So there was predictability. Like, I never wanted alcohol at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, good. And I think sometimes it's bittersweet for people like us because, again, you don't know me, but I would relate to how you used these things.
Yeah.
It's almost the worst thing when you can stop for a month or you can stop for 2 weeks, because that's when we really think we're smart. And it's like, oh, well, no, I'm good. Like, I can do this. I'm not the person doing this at 8 a.m. And certainly there are levels to it. And in a sense, of course, physically, that is worse to be doing it 24/7,
Yes.
obviously. But the confidence that sometimes can come, the false confidence, they're like, oh yeah, no, this isn't too big of a thing. It's really tough. So I know that you talked about there was a time, obviously, when you said enough's enough, but I'm so impressed by someone who, I mean, the brain's obviously been fully developed at that time for
Mhm.
approximately 20 years. For you to then say that, hey, this is the time I'm changing, that is a statistical rarity. So was there any type of like aha moment or final straw that drew you to like, no, this is finally it? Or was it just the accumulation of thoughts over many years saying that this is wrong?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. So I didn't have like an epiphany or that one event
Mhm.
that everybody's like, oh, that was my bottom out or that was my rock bottom. For me, it was accumulation over just not feeling good in the mornings about myself. Like, the internal critic was so nasty. Like, you call yourself a healthcare practitioner and you've got this over drinking habit on, at night. Like, how could you counsel people on, this can harm your liver? like the words just came out of my mouth just felt so not in alignment with how I was behaving. There were times, like one time I promised my daughter to take her to the trampoline park after we had a Friday night dance party. My husband's drinking, I'm drinking, we're cutting the rug. We're just having a grand old time, rocking it out to 90s music. And she's dancing. And she was about 5.5 at the time. And she mentioned, Mommy, could we go to the trampoline park tomorrow? And I'm like, yes, we can. And I don't recall that conversation. So Saturday morning, when she comes in with her grippy socks, the trampoline socks, and she's all dressed out, ready to go at 8 in the morning, and I'm still sleeping. And she wakes up. She goes, "Are you ready for the trampoline park?" I'm like, "What trampoline park? We're not going to the trampoline park today." Completely didn't know that I had that conversation the night before. And she's like, "But you told me last night when I asked you." And that was like, wow, I'm really starting to forget some things with the most precious people in my life. That hurt really bad. Like, that hit at the gut level. And I would notice, a few months of that going on, not necessarily just with my daughter, but with friends, where they were telling me things I said the night before at a party and I don't recall. And man, that just felt so out of integrity with me. My inner critic is so just hard. And it was just like, you got to stop. This is not how you want to be remembered. This is not the role you want to set for your daughter. And this is just not appropriate to be acting. Like, I really felt it was inappropriate for me to act that way.
Wow, it's hard in one sense, but it's freaking awesome on the other. I
Yeah.
swear, some of the best stories that have ever come on here have been moms that are on a mission. Like, they might find it harder to change for themselves, but the second that something else involved, that love, I'll never be a mom, right? So, uh, it just seems like it outweighs everything and can move mountains when it needs to. And I'll keep this very vague, but I'm especially impressed because I'll word it like this. There is a group of young people that I have the opportunity to be around frequently throughout the year. And, I don't, first of all, I don't like drinking anyway, but I maybe have like a glass of wine. I don't not drink, but if I looked at the last 4 years, I probably had 5 glasses of wine total over the 5 years. So that's kind of how I am with it. But I make a point to never show these young people under the age of 18 that they need to have fun with
Yeah.
drugs and alcohol to get together all together. And that's not the same philosophy that some of the other adults in their life have. I'll just put it that way. And I'm like, wow, like these kids are sponges, man. They're picking up everything and learning that this is how you have fun as an adult. And I'm excluded from something. I'm the 28-year-old that's still hanging out with them, throwing the ball, jumping on the trampoline, whatever. And not because I've always been perfect with it. I think it's the opposite. It's because I know what the other end is. So I want to show them, hey, if you want to take that path, that's a choice. If you want to take this path, that's a choice too. You can do either.
Yeah. And what really bothered me too, Evan, I'll say I didn't have any difficulties in my life. I'm successful, right? Like I'm not doing this that to my knowledge that I was covering up any trauma or like that was kind of like if I went to a therapist, they'd want to try to uncover something. And I did seek therapy over this. And I don't know what there was to uncover. It was, to me, it was this solo bad habit. And I think sometimes in the addiction world or in certain spaces, they think you need to make amends and follow these guides or these principles to like get healthy or get better. And none of that felt like I was carrying any of that. So I really felt alone. I felt misunderstood. I felt trapped. I really felt trapped because as a pharmacist, you cannot actually see a health person and not have it hit, if it goes through insurance, not hit your medical record, which then can jeopardize my career that you work so hard for, right? So I see people in the medical profession a lot being like kind of handcuffed with how to get the appropriate treatment. And if you go to an anonymous group, are you really anonymous? Like your face, they know your name, they know your face. Like if you're somebody high up in the community or respected in the community, I'm not sure that's always anonymous and feeling like a safe, viable option for people.
100%. Wow. Didn't even think about that. And I appreciate you shedding light on that too, that sometimes this can just happen without, a history of trauma, because I've talked to so many people that have dealt with these types of things. I will say if off numbers, I found that to be a rarity, but it does exist and it's underrepresented because no one shares that. Because a lot of the times the people, that are in true addiction, it's like, holy cow, they were abused as a kid or something major happened.
Yeah.
But these substances are powerful and they play on our brains. So it can happen to anyone. Now, with this all said, I'd love to know, because I'm already impressed that at 40 something, we're saying, all right, we're going to make this huge change that's now it's been a part of your life longer than not at that point, if you started in your teens. So that's hard. How the heck did you start that journey of healing?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I felt that the traditional modalities, maybe their limiting beliefs or whatever I had, they just didn't feel right for me. I also didn't want to stop. I didn't want to be, quote, in the box of sober. So I loved how you said, I don't care about alcohol. I don't drink alcohol, but it's, I don't say, well, I'll never have it. I'll have a glass of wine here and there. So that was what I was seeking, was to become a woman who can take it or leave it. And I would say that to my husband over and over and over. I just want to be a woman who can take it or leave it with alcohol. It doesn't have this strong pull. If I have a sip, I'm not feeling torn that I need another and another, and I need to keep the buzz going, and I need to keep, this is how I let loose, or this is how I let down, or this is how I manage my stress. Like I didn't want it tied up to all of that. So where do you go? Because that's not the main message being touted out there. So I felt very alone. And finally, I found a health coach who helped me because she had overcome an over drinking habit. And I'm like, she put it perfectly. It's a habit. It started around right after work, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. It would end around 9, right? And I'd go to bed and do rinse and repeat. So I was like, that's what it is. It feels like a habit. It didn't feel like this crutching, my life was in shambles type of addiction. And so when I started working with her, I started drinking less and drinking less and drinking less, to now where I really am like you. It doesn't faze me. And I'm very aware of the actions I take around particularly younger adults
Yeah.
or kids, because I really want to be a role model for health, and that's important to me.
Okay, that's super interesting because, again, guys, first of all, I think Dr. Price, just like me, would recognize that there's different philosophies here, but it's actually very rare that I find someone that's in the same boat here. So, yeah, you're not saying, hey, I'm 100% sober. It's just you handle this a lot differently now. Okay.
Yeah, it's not an emotional crutch. I don't use it for stress relaxation. I don't have those needs that are met by alcohol. I have those needs, but they're just not met by alcohol as the solution.
That's I usually can't even get into these types of conversations because it just doesn't land with people. So even almost weirder in my sense is that I have found, because I used multiple substances, the
Yeah.
different times that I used them at life and for what they were used for, they seem to have a different effect. Like, ironically, of all things, because people would consider this one fairly benign compared to some of the other stuff I chose to do, marijuana is probably the hardest one for me. Like, if I was, in San Diego visiting with my wife or something, we're like, all right, you want to have fun tonight, do something stupid. That would be a problem instantly. And then it's
Hmm.
like whole thing. Whereas alcohol, not a big deal. I did use benzodiazepines in high school, but I've used them prescription for flights when I was trying to get over my fear of flying 5 years ago. Didn't have a problem. Never thought like, oh, I need to go take this every single day now. It's just so weird to me how almost like
Yeah.
certain substances seem to be wired into my brain differently. And I think we need to have more conversations around this and the awareness,
Yeah.
and find out what's actually hurting people more. Because for me, when I said I'm going sober forever and I'm never going to touch alcohol again, I made it a year and a half. And the day that I broke that year and a half with alcohol, I had 11 drinks that night. I didn't drive a car, didn't do anything stupid, but the stupid part
Hmm.
was the 11 drinks.
Hmm.
Then, over the last 4 years now, I never say I don't drink alcohol. I just say I don't do it often. I've never
Hmm.
had more than 2 drinks in a night again. And it happened probably, again, maybe 5 times every few years on average. So that's pretty cool. I like how I think I worded that wrong at the end, but you guys know what I meant. Like, by not putting that label on myself, ironically, I got a better result because for people like us that have that like thought in their head, it's like, oh my God, I can't do this ever. I can't do this ever. Can't do this ever. And then it explodes. So you became a coach yourself. Is this what inspired that?
Exactly. Exactly. When I'm like, wow, I feel there's a niche here that's untouched. That women are suffering in silence, particularly professional women, CEOs, people in corporate America. They got this expense account, and maybe their client drinks, and they're taught, match their drinking style, right? Like all of the societal norms that we come to justify our behavior. For some people, they stop feeling good and they want that change and they don't know where to go. And maybe they're not interested in the sober label or tried that and it didn't work for them for some reason. And so they want a different avenue and a different approach. And so I felt my skill set would benefit them.
And for the listeners, then, do you primarily work with people who are dealing with a similar situation to what you talked about? Or can you help? I'm sure you can, but do you
Yeah.
work with people with just general negative habits anyway?
Yeah. So this could be brought into, excess sugar intake. There's a lot of women that want to lose weight and they've got like the dessert thing, or they've got the French fry thing, right? It's really, a lot of this can be applied to whatever the substance. And if people are more severe, then I resource out to my colleagues if they're more severe with their addiction.
Okay. So how do you, I guess, because I almost want to ask this for the sake of the audience, how do you kind of figure out where this line is? Because I do admit, I think it's a very fine line
It's
between what we're
very,
talking about where
absolutely.
we're here and, hey, this needs extra. So how do you decipher that?
Yeah, it's very difficult line. And I wish I could say, if they meet these 5 criteria, then they're off. And it's not that. I get to know them. I get to know their pattern. I get to know if there's things that elevate use, if there's things that decrease use. Why is their use, right? What are they using to cope from or numb from? So based on all of that, history of addiction in their family, I think is important to also assess. Trauma is important to look for. And so I think a lot of those factors go into the decision.
So for people that are interested in this type of stuff, because I know is it going to be like if we had 100 people listening, is it going to be everyone that relates to this? No. But the people that do, they're like, oh my gosh, someone's finally talking to
Yeah.
me, because again, it's one extreme or the other. It's never this nuanced. So if they were interested in working with someone like you, what does the coaching look like now? I'm sure it's a little bit different for everyone, but I just want to know, is this something that you engage people on for a year, or is it a month? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah. So I allow them to tell me how long. I have multiple types of programs people can choose. So some people really want the community. They're at home, they're alone. Maybe they're a new empty nester, and they just don't know how to manage their feelings. So they're drinking because they're alone, or they've had this issue of over drinking because of a divorce 5 years ago, and they're long healed from the divorce, but the drinking's still around. And they feel less shame when they come into a group environment and hear other women talk about how they're using and how they're utilizing the tools that I teach to cut back. So there's the group setting, and then there's some people that feel that they're high profile or just don't want the group setting. They want more confidentiality. And so I can provide that safe space so we can evaluate why they're doing what they're doing and then break those patterns. So there's also a one-on-one approach that's available, because I know a one size fits all doesn't work for everybody. And I certainly want to accommodate those people who feel stuck and don't feel like the traditional avenues are right for them.
Yeah. I like that you offer both, because you're right. It's again, another rare day that I'd find someone that's like totally cool with either. I remember when I got myself in trouble, they tried to put me into this group. I literally told the counselor, it's so crazy looking back, because they could have just told me what to do. It's not like I had an option. I just went to them like, yeah, this ain't for me. Let's do the one-on-one thing. Like, there is no way I'm doing this with 10 or 15 other people.
Yeah.
And then for others, man, that sense of community and getting to hear that's like the most healing thing in the world.
Golden.
So I love that you do both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it really breaks the shame too, if people can talk about it in not this depressing manner, but more like how I address it now. It's like something we just did in the past and now we don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It doesn't have to be this moral failing. It doesn't have to be this like I'm a bad person. And when women can see other women talk about, oh yeah, I used to drink, 35 glasses of wine a week, and now I'm down to 8. They're like, wow, that gives them hope and just progress. That feels good.
Right. Absolutely. So the EpicYou part of your brand, I mean, it's the website, it's part of the podcast. I'd love to touch on that, because this almost just sounds like healing back to normalcy. EpicYou, when I think about that or envision that, I'm thinking like conquering mountains, doing all this stuff. So where does that come into what you do and what you offer?
Yeah, I loved it because it's lighthearted and it's uplifting. And I think when you talk about cutting out something out of your life, there feels like deprivation. There's the want feeling. There's the I'm broken feeling. And honestly, you probably know this. Like once you make one small change in your life, there's just this ripple effect. And so, when you cut back on alcohol, my relationship with my daughter got so much better because I stopped avoiding the difficult conversations, and I was willing to have the difficult conversations. I was willing to express my emotions rather than just numb them down. So like this ripple effect, I'm like, okay, it's great that, I can control alcohol or don't want it. That's great. But then the ripple effect of that and the ripple effect of that and the ripple effect of that. Now I'm like, this makes me feel powerful. This makes me feel epic. This makes me feel like it's like an accomplishment, and coming on this side when you're healthier and you feel better and you get your gut all sorted out, right? Because, alcohol and the gut lining, terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not just the brain and the liver that we talk about so much. It has so many effects in your skin. I mean, your fine lines start to disappear. So I just see women, they get so excited. They're like, okay, I cut back 50% and that feels amazing. And guess what? My husband noticed I dropped 5 pounds, or now I'm communicating with my husband better. And so it's just these little incremental changes that happen over time that people feel like their life is just, they're not on fire for their life now. So they just start feeling epic. So I love the EpicYou.
See that you got to, you're good with this. You sell the smart stuff, right? You sell weight and the fine lines. We'll worry about the brain and that gut stuff later, right? But you sell vanity first. It always works. And it is, I mean, I laugh, but man, of all the health conditions that I had, and there were some that were serious, like very serious. cystic acne was always the most motivating one, right? Because that's just how we're wired, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I love what you talked about.
Let me just interrupt there. And I think that's why some people don't get help, Evan, is because you can hide the drinking so easily. It's such an easy, you can't hide additional weight. People see it, but you can hide the drinking. And so, wow, it comes, that secrecy is just yours and yours alone. And it can take you to really some dark places. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Well, and you're totally right. It's not, as I'm 28 now, but as I've gotten more into what I call always like the real adult world. I mean, I think we should be adults at 18. I agree with that. But the real adult world, I feel like has only come the last several years. I am shocked by just from someone with this background, by how many people there are out there like the former you. I mean, they're very successful. They work the jobs. Yeah. It's not like their life's not falling apart, at least on the surface, but it's not hard to find friends, I guess, that will go humor what you're talking about too, where it's like, no, it is normal for them to have 5 drinks on a Thursday or something over dinner just because they were out with their friends. So yeah, it's not hard to find people to do that either. That's another problem.
Yeah. And they think it's part of success. It's how it's the reward we get because we're successful.
Yeah. The one thing that you just said that I really loved was this idea that when you start to kind of win in one area, these other wins start happening and other things get better. I had this, it wasn't a direct mentor, it was more like a group mentor at 18. And I understand there's only one thing I remembered from him talking to us. He said, anything permitted increases. And I'm like, okay. So what that meant though is if you allow one bad habit in, it has a tendency, one, that habit will increase, but 2, it has a tendency to increase other bad habits, right? I have 5 drinks. Chances are I'm probably not going to eat the best food. I don't really care about the organic gluten-free thing at that point. And similarly, what's great about humans is if we start doing these right things, you get someone to the gym, man, and they're actually focused and they're looking fit and athletic. All of a sudden they want to start eating better because they want to support that goal. And then they feel better. Their job goes better. Your relationships get better. It's kind of crazy how that happens. So how has the rest of your life been impacted? I know you mentioned the stuff with your daughter, but I'm thinking about, there was a time commitment here, especially if you weren't remembering occasionally what happened at night. I mean, there's a huge time commitment to that. So what does that time get filled with now?
Yeah, it's amazing how much time I have back. And that's one of the things people will find is like, oh my gosh, I have so much of my time back, right? Because I used to be distracted and just numbing out and not paying, just entertaining myself with alcohol. And now that I'm not entertaining myself that way or numbing out that way, I have all this time. So you can do so much, right? Home projects get done, your to-do list gets conquered. Like if you're type A and, and a high achiever like myself, I love having the extra time. And even if I just want to rest, read a book, relax, you know how nice it is to read a book before bed and remember it the next day or not pass out on the first sentence. Like it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful unwinding process that really nurtures my soul, really nurtures my cells. And I was relaxing with wine, but I wasn't nourishing my body and nourishing my cells. I was damaging them. So this just has a different flavor, a different feel. It's more of that work hard, rest hard. And I really enjoy that yin and yang rather than beat myself up during the day, beat my liver, skin, all the things up at night with alcohol. This is more of that rest and restore that I'm able to bring back in.
As someone like you who works with high achievers, I'm just curious, do you think that these substance misuse issues are overrepresented in high achievers, or is it just that all walks of life are affected and they're better at hiding it?
Good question. I don't know if they're better at hiding it.
Okay.
I think anybody can hide it, right? I just think they might cling to it more because they feel misunderstood. Like, their spouse doesn't understand or is just numb to it. And yes, that can happen in any walk of life, but I think the high achiever takes it to heart really bad because they like to achieve. And if this is not something that they're achieving at, I think it eats at them.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's very interesting because I related so much when you talked about that voice and the shame. Like that was one of the biggest motivating factors. It's just like I'm like, I want this to stop. And for those that are out there listening that don't get it, we don't mean in some psychotic way. It's just, your inner conscience. It like literally says, like, what are you doing? This is dumb. Stop doing this. And it's like, okay, I know. Sorry.
Speaking
And
of
then
that, one of my most popular podcasts and blogs is the 6 a.m. self versus my 6 p.m. self. Two different dialogues. 6 a.m. self, I'm never doing this again. We're going to cut back tonight. No drinking tonight. 6 a.m. self has all this uplifting dialogue and a little bit of berating right from the night before. And then the 6 p.m. self is like, what was I thinking? I just need that glass of Chardonnay. I just want one glass. And then one glass became two. So you're right. There is that inner dialogue that is exhausting emotionally and mentally.
let's make sure we get the link to that once this is done, because we'll be done in about 15 minutes. I want to put it directly in the comments because this will already be on YouTube. I'm interested, one, in that one. And two, I think that's something, again, very relatable for a select group that's really getting what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
When someone offers coaching, whether it's one-on-one, group, that's always going to be the best option. But what I always try to do is figure out, is there's some tools that the individual that I'm interviewing has learned that could be directly applicable to the audience. So what are some maybe like top one or even top two tools that you have that the audience listening can go take and run with them right now to help with these negative habits?
Well, I think for one, you can't implement any of these tools unless, one, you have the awareness that you want to change and why. Like, it's not like the Simon Sinek why question, but it's like, what is the motivating reason behind wanting to reduce this bad habit? And what does the goal look like? I think that's important too, because goals are motivating. So it's not just I want to drink less than 50%, or like, I'm sorry, it's not just I want this drinking habit to go away, but the better way to phrase that would be the goal, drinking by 50%, right? So that's what motivated me, was really defining what the goal was. And it wasn't, like I said initially, it wasn't about being sober or any of that. Just get my drink count down. So I feel the goal is motivating to do that. And here's the thing, I wasn't proud to say that, because in this traditional medical model that I grew up in, I learned, hey, if you cross that one line, that you can't control it, then the only way to heal is to not do it at all. So it didn't even feel like that was realistic. It didn't even feel like that was possible, because I felt I had crossed some arbitrary line. So I think I wasn't really believing in myself. I really wasn't believing in that goal, because for some reason I was believing society's beliefs about gray area drinking, which turns out, when I started actually doing the research, many people who overdrink aren't classified as severe use disorder. And so they don't necessarily have to go cold turkey sober for life. Now, there is a percentage that does, but that's not the majority of people, which I found that statistic by the CDC very empowering to me. And so when I started thinking then, okay, the awareness piece, my goal, and then a tool I started to use is like, what was the one or two ways that I was using alcohol in excess? And one of the ways for me was disappointment and anger. So those two emotions would drive up my drinking at least by 50%. Those would be my high quantity nights. So I knew if I could just start there with controlling my anger, controlling my disappointment, really get a handle of those two emotions, then my drinking would come down, because that was driving the drinking. See, a lot of people point to the alcohol as the problem or the drug as the problem, but it's really like what's going on inside of you. And for me, it was those two emotions, which didn't feel safe to have, which felt like they were bad to have. And so I wanted to numb them and put them out like a fire extinguisher right away. And alcohol did that beautifully, right? It just like calmed me. It's like, oh, okay, it's okay that this happened. And so it would be that calming, relaxation and relaxant that I needed. So learning anger management strategies, learning disappointment management strategies was very helpful. And a lot of that is the power of working with your mind, is where I found most of my benefit early on.
How do you handle, especially for type A high achievers, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I consider it almost inevitable because I've seen enough people, the 2-step forward, 1 step back thing,
Yeah.
because this killed me because I would be making progress. And if
Yeah.
I actually looked at the last 3 months, I'd be like, no, Ev, you're doing good. But these things are hard to break, and there's regression to a temporary regression
Yes.
sometimes. So I don't know if you experienced that, but what is your advice to people like us that are super strung out in type A, to not beat ourselves up and to keep in perspective that we actually are moving forward? It's just there's going to be some bumps.
Yes, and that's expected, right? That is so expected. To not expect that is a rarity. So I love that you asked that question so much, because I have a free guide on my website talking about 7 strategies that you can implement when you are hitting a setback. So, if you're trying to go to the gym and you haven't done it at all, and then your goal is 3 times a week, well, there are going to be some weeks maybe you don't fit in 3 times a week, right? That's would be considered a setback. And when dealing with alcohol or some drugs, they call it a relapse. I just like to say it was just a setback. That's what I have it, that, 7 strategies to handle a setback. And you can use any one of those strategies so that you're not like stuck in the setback. So you're like, oh, this is supposed to happen. This is part of the learning experience. I don't think it's a failure. I think it's a learning. What went down this time that was different? What can I learn? And maybe my anger, I was good at controlling it when it was an 8 out of 10. But that one time I went 10 out of 10, I went ballistic. Like, okay, so I'm not good at managing my 10 out of 10 anger. I'm really good at managing the 8 out of 10 anger. So that is my ability and skill that I need to add to my repertoire so that this won't happen again, or I lessen the chance of this happening again.
I love this. So having a healthy but positive reflection on it, like, hey, why did this happen? And then watching out for that in the future. And again, I know that this philosophy is not appropriate for everyone at all times, but I think the setback thing that you just mentioned is what kind of worked for me, because remember I said there was that year and a half, and then that ended with freaking 11 drinks in one night. And then
Yeah.
there's multiple years, thank God, at this point where it's like I literally I've almost not drank those amount of drinks cumulatively as that one night. But the difference was when I viewed it as I promised myself never again, and now here I am doing it. It's almost like, well, might as well numb it more, because now the more I'm doing, the worse I'm feeling. The worse I'm feeling, the more I want it. Versus if I go have a glass of wine tonight with my wife, I didn't break anything. It's not a
Right.
setback. I'm doing way better. This is exactly
Right.
what I said I was going to do.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
love that.
it's a lot of how you reframe it too, and how you view a setback.
Okay, so at this point in the show, we'll obviously be more direct about where people can find you in just a moment. But I love to hear stories of transformation, obviously, but ones outside of us too, because sometimes people listen and they're like, well, oh my gosh, that's the host and that's the person being interviewed. I can never be like them. And it's like, first of all, we're average people, but two, they're there are other people doing these things. So I'd love to know, to the degree that you're able to share, because I know there's privacy, especially with this.
Yeah.
But to the degree that you're able to share, is there a particular client that you've worked with that, they're at the end of the rope? They're like, I don't know how to manage this stuff. And the
Mhm.
tools that you gave them were the things that kind of set them free. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I have so many examples, and all walks of life, all professions. But the one I really want to highlight is somebody who is in their early 60s, because I think for a lot of people, they give up on themselves as they age, or they use age as a factor for not being able to handle something or control something or conquer something, however they want to frame it. And she came in and she was just like, I'm so done with this drinking thing. I say it all the time, but I never follow through. I'm so mad at myself. I'm so angry. This drinking thing has got to go. I don't even know if you can help me. And she just kept talking and talking and talking, because you could tell she was so passionate about where she wanted to go, and how she felt so stuck, and how she tried all these things, right? And she's been here and she's done this, and she has so much shame and so much aggravation. And so I just really, held her, and I'm like, yes, let's try it. Let's try it. And so it didn't take very long for her. She had this habit go on for 30 years. It was common in her industry. She felt that this is what people do after work. I don't even know if I can change. I still want to keep my job for another several years. And I'm also annoyed by my husband. So the first session, it was all about the drinking, and then the husband annoyance was the undertone that kept coming up. And I said, well, we're getting progress on this drinking thing. Let's handle this relationship with your husband, because it sounds like it really bothers you and you want it to be better. She goes, I do want it to be better, and I keep telling him what's going to make it better, and he's not changing. And so we worked on that. And once we worked on that relationship, which was like really 4 to 6, 8 weeks, that relationship totally blossomed. She was totally excited, and he didn't have to change a thing. It was her. And then she's like, Sherry, where's my desire for alcohol? It's just not here. So you just don't you're not always aware of the aggravation you're pushing down. And then when you start drinking a little less and then you clear up the aggravation, the desire can just morph and change. And so I loved for her within, a few months, she was just able to look at alcohol as like no big deal. She drinks sometimes, but not regularly. And then she went back to her organization, and now other women are cutting back because of her lead. And she just feels like so thankful for this new reframe on her life, this new relationship with her husband, and this new relationship with alcohol.
That's awesome. That's so cool. And it's empowering for me to hear yet another story of someone that, again, that is later in life. You don't expect the changes then. And there's a change.
Yeah.
And not only is it a change, it's a kind of unconventional one, at least in our sense. It's like, no, I don't have to go cold turkey. It doesn't have to be a quitting thing, but I have to figure out how to balance this and make this a normal part of life, which it can be for some people. So I think that's really cool. Now, podcast, I want to shout that out too. So let's remind people of the name. And then also I'd like to know, what type of content can people expect on your podcast? Because just because we host one, I look at this as what should be like modern day TV. I hope people are kicking the TVs out of the house and they're tuning into different podcasts, but you don't just have one podcast or TV show that you watch or listen to or watch. You have multiple. So let's shout yours out and then talk about the type of content that they could expect if they tune in.
Yeah. So I originally started off with drink less lifestyle because I wanted a lifestyle where I drank less. It wasn't something I did intermittently. It was like truly my lifestyle. And then I changed it, rebranded it this year to Health Habits and Epic Living, because I didn't really want to focus on the alcohol. I wanted to focus on living with less alcohol. And so that's around habit change, our health. And also, I find that a lot of women were coming to me, not just with the alcohol thing. So now this opens up really how to take care of yourself, how to manage your emotions. So those are the kind of content that we get into is on Health Habits and Epic Living, is just really taking care of your health, all the ways you can empower yourself, all the ways you can invite coaches or doctors along the way to empower you, knowing when things are off, like when you get a setback, having tools for that. I talk about that on a podcast as well. So really just taking care of your health and through mindset practices as well.
Very cool. And then everything else that you do can just be found on EpicYou.com, right?
Yes, all my resources are on EpicYou.com. And then I am on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn as Dr. Sherry Price.
Perfect. All right. My final question for you is the signature question on the show. And I know we've been kind of focusing on one particular thing, but this is where the answer can be general. Doesn't matter to me, whatever comes to you. So the question is this: if you could wave a magic wand and you could get every single person who is either watching this or listening to this in the future to do one thing for their health. So that means you can get us all to stop doing one thing, or you can get us all to start doing one thing. What is the one thing that Dr. Sherry Price gets us to do?
One, I'd say move and smile. I can't pick one.
I love that you're like, one, here you go. You would not be the first. I think the record's 3, so don't worry about it.
I think there's so much to lend a smile for you that you benefit and for others, and then movement in our sedentary society.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I actually did forget something. Is Reed's episode with you already out? Is that something that they can listen to now?
It's coming out next week.
Awesome. All right. So especially depending on when you're listening to this, if it's the audio side, that probably means that it's already out. If you're live with us right now, as some of you are, then obviously you have to wait a little bit. So go to EpicYou.com/podcast and you can check it out there. Dr. Price, thank you so much. Super interesting conversation. And I like interviewing anyone, but I love getting to do interviews where I really relate to the topic in full.